Welcome to the Invisible Strings podcast, where we discuss the science of yoga. My goal is to help you deepen your yoga practice for spiritual growth, mental health, and physical well-being, using scientific principles. I am Joey Weifels. I'm a yoga teacher and PhD student in kinesiology at Michigan State University. My interest is in sharing the science and philosophy of how we perceive and control our body. Today's episode is on how to deepen your yoga practice by finding the optimal focus of attention. We will talk about how to pay attention to your movements during your asana practice, which is what most people think of as yoga, the postures. Or, if you're instructing yoga, how you direct the focus of attention and thoughts of your students, which is part of your job description as a yoga teacher. For the purposes of this discussion, let's say our goal is to keep up with a beginner or intermediate yoga class. There's lots more to be said about attention in other aspects of yoga, but for now let's focus on the physical part of the practice to keep it simple. In most classes there are some relaxing poses, a few postures with a complicated alignment, some tough balancing, some strength, some coordination, and challenging stretches. What is a focus of attention and why is it important for asana? What should we focus on or think, or even what not to think or focus on while we move? In the psychology of sport and in kinesiology, there's lots of established research, mainly by Gabriel Wolf at the University of Nevada, that shows that an external focus of attention, which is an outside goal directed attention, compared to an internal focus of attention, which is a paying attention to the inside component processes of the movement, is what's best for performance and learning of motor skills. In controlled experiments, these findings are very consistent, and I have found the same results in my own studies. This does suggest that we need to use and instruct using an external focus of attention to get better at our postures. Now, you've probably experienced such effects on yourself without knowing what they are called in the psychological side of motor control research literature. You may have experienced that you are far better at dancing when you just feel the music compared to how you think about how your feet should move. Or that looking at the ball increases your likelihood of hitting the ball as opposed to looking at your racket. There's a decent chance you have your phone in your hand right now. Let's say you're scrolling. Do you need to think about how to move your thumb to get to the next post? All you have to really do is to get to the next post is have the goal to find the next one. Your thumb and eyes will move automatically. Without any of your awareness going into the exact act of those movements, the awareness is on what's filled on the screen. Similarly, when you're walking, you just look where to go. An external goal-directed focus of attention, and not about how to lift and land your feet, which is an internal movement process. Directed focus of attention towards your body. Your body is going to automatically fall in line in the external case, but if you start digging into the internal ongoings of your body, it is getting to the goal. That will slow you down and freeze you up, inhibiting your performance and learning. In yoga, an external focus of attention is when one emphasizes paying attention towards the goal of your movement. Would be, for example, holding your stable balance by paying attention to a focal point, such as a tree in front of your gaze. In yoga, we call a gaze on a stationary point a dristi. That will benefit you more than using an internal focus attention. In this case, an internal focus could be, for example, balancing postures focusing on the tilt of your pelvis, the pressure of your feet on the ground, or the sensations of your breath. In this particular case, the theory of why this happens is that an external focus on the gazing point, the student is working to maintain a constant optic flow, to minimize the fluctuations in the visual information. By maintaining constant visual information as a goal, the body is taught to automatically self-organize its muscles. Thereby, the control of muscles is achieved unconsciously, without needing to pay too much attention. Just like how when you scroll on your phone without thinking more than what you need to see next, so do you balance without thinking of your body, but by thinking of maintaining a stable point. A self-organizing system is a system which acts without being guided or managed by an external agent. You are doing it unconsciously and are not an active agent in the details of the movement. It does not work well to think about every single angle or position your body needs to take, because there's too much ongoing for your mind and it does not have the capacity for it. The ecological and philosophy here is incredibly interesting. You need all the parts of your body to work together well to move accurately. Each muscle fiber, your neurons, your breath, your blood pumping, your eyes and ears sensing. And that's just for the movement and making a motion. To move, you also have to maintain your body. So it needs the organs for metabolism, excretion, your immune system, and much more. All these parts are self-organized. That is, no one entity directs them on how to act, so as them to work together. Each part responds to the parts around it, and that organization emerges by itself. As a side note, when you as a teacher walk in front of a balancing student, you are disrupting their optic flow, the experience. They will likely fall over. So if you want to make it easy on your students, which I'm not saying you must, avoid being in their line of sight while they balance. Also, is one of the reasons that a student you might want to consider being at the front of a yoga class, so you do not get distracted by other students falling over. The idea of the other, the internal focus of attention, in the case of a balancing posture like a tree pose, where one of your foot soles is pressed against the other leg, so inner thigh, standing on the other foot, hands pressed together. Here you could focus your attention, or as the teacher gives you clues to your students, to observe the neutral tilt and angle in their pelvis, the press of the hands and feet together towards the midline. Find the arch in the standing foot or lengthen the back of the neck. All things required to stabilize well. Doing such focuses on just a few aspects of the shape or state of the body that will, while relating to the goal, cannot completely encapsulate the goal. In the case of an internal attention, the attention will bias the self-organization of your body's perception and action towards achieving parts of your body in focus at the cost of achieving the overall goal, which is less emphasized. So while you might get your pelvis at an optimal angle, it may negatively impact other aspects required to hold the posture well, because it's interfering in self-organization and it's disrupting automated behavior. While I'm not aware of any yoga postures which have had research into this focus of attention effect on them, the literature generally says that for balance, throwing, lifting, hitting, etc., support that one should choose external focus of attention instead, such as in other sports. Now here's where I will provide another perspective to focus of attention literature as it pertains to yoga in the motor control. One of the purposes of asana is to heal our imbalances of mind and body. In the case of a weak or tight muscle, the body will avoid utilizing them in favor of what feels easier. That is what self-organization relies on. It chooses the path of least resistance, and that's what enables its automaticity. And that's what makes you misaligned. A teacher needs to notice this, as students often lack the experience to know in what manner their body has imbalances, so in which way their body makes incorrect automatic postures. It is very hard to cure imbalances without cueing to the body and breaking self-organization, just temporarily. So imbalances can be healed. Once the imbalance is healed, it can become automatic without thinking again. This is one reason why correct alignment is so important. If you let your students get away with a sloppy alignment, they will worsen their imbalances, and asanas can injure them over the long term. The cue of planes of glass also encourages the front knee to move to a center. It also encourages the front knee to move towards the center, more in line with the hip at 90 degrees. It encourages to illustrate this, let's say I'm instructing a warrior 2. For those that are less familiar with yoga, in this posture your legs are far apart to the front and back edges of the mat. Your front knee is bent 90 degrees, your front toes are pointed towards the front, your back foot is pointed towards the side. To that same side, your chest is facing. Hands are out long, one pointing to the front, one pointing to the back. You're looking towards the front hand. A common way to cue this posture is an external way. It is to say, imagine self being squeezed between two planes of glass. In that way, it helps the students open their hips wide, getting more distance between their feet, lowering them, bending the knee stronger, which makes the stance lower. It encourages the front knee to straighten towards the midline, in line with the hip, while it tends to fall internally, which risks injury. It encourages pulling in the belly button to straighten the spine. All of this builds strength, and the pose gets this fierce feeling, doing so by setting the goal of becoming as flat as possible. However, the glass squeezing metaphor, in my experience, does not achieve this alignment sufficiently. This is because most people are disconnected from their body, and when moving find easy paths to the pose rather than perfect paths. I find students benefit from instruction on all particular aspects one by one of the motion required. As a teacher, we must adjust the self-organization of their control system by cueing very specifically. This is really hard to do without reference to their body, which is an internal focus of attention. To cue a teacher, one may say to have a second toe of the front foot visible while the rest of the foot is hidden behind the front knee. If I look back, my hand is the height of my shoulder. My feet are digging into the ground as I feel force feeding the outside of the mat, which I compensate by force that would make my legs spread by pulling in and up my pelvic floor to compensate the outside moving force with an inside moving force. In that way, I'm pulling my legs from both sides. I'm creating a strong stretch in my legs. These cues have aspects that are more referential to the body and thus a bit more internal focus inducing. Luckily, rather than in other sports, in yoga we hold the postures for a long time, enough to have the time to make those adjustments one by one. But in the transition to another pose, focus and attention is important as well. In a vinyasa sequence, a common act is to go from warrior 2 to a reverse warrior, where the front hand lifts to the sky and the back hand lowers to the leg, creating a stretch on the side of the torso. If the cue, which might be reach your front hand to the sky, only contains this information, a beginner student will almost always lose the ankle in their front knee. This is because the full body organizes to achieve raising the hand and will choose the least resisting path. So while the only act is to rise the hand, that hand is connected to the knee via connective tissue, fascia. Without the internal focus cue of keeping the front knee stable and bend at 90 degrees, the student will follow the action of the myofascial line without resisting its pull. I will talk about fascia and resistance stretching, which this relates to in a future episode. Myofascial lines are the connecting lines described well in Thomas Meyer's work. The line runs from hand through chest to knee. Because as the hand stretches, it also stretches the arm, which stretches the chest. Where it loses the slack on the sides of the chest becomes taut, then the connection from the hip leg to the knee becomes taut as well. And then as the hip comes up with the hand, the knee straightens, extends, because of the pull on the knee. There are many situations that expose where the mind has trouble finding awareness and resolution in the body well enough to maintain this type of control. Yoga exposes these situations and trains you to improve. Take the difference between contracting only your biceps versus moving only your pinky toe. When actions aren't performed often, the mind doesn't form the abilities to control. Students need to be made aware that their body is acting automatically by mechanical pulls from parts which are controlled voluntary. This is why asana is good for mind-body connection. The student learns to feel the connections between various body parts. As they practice, their control gets more details correct. It's an increase in resolution of perception of the body, and thereby the ability to act more accurately. Once a skill is practiced such that the system no longer has automatic issues, finding the correct details is when external focus of attention is most useful. As in the case not only in yoga but in most skills. You'll want to pay attention to what needs improvement, and once performance is sufficient, attention may be freed from it. Examples: to focus on the breath in yoga, or in sport, the opponent, for example. I often use a mix of strategies when cueing. Generally, I go with more external cues during a vinyasa flow, where I need to get out of a transition quickly, whereas internal cues I reserve for outlining postures on longer holds. One question left is, how can I say use internal focus of attention when the scientific literature consistently says external focus of attention is better for performance and motor learning? Should I not be following the numbers instead of my experience as a student and teacher? Well, unfortunately, the literature in the field of motor control and psychology saying that external focus of attention is better is a result of a major flaw. Being not well equipped to measure the benefits of internal focus of attention for the movements is because it's most useful when an individual student has a specific imbalance that needs to be fixed with detailed attention. When we set up a scientific study into measuring motor skills, we take some people and have them do a task, like having them balance, throw, and reach for something. Very simple task. The task is designed to be simple enough that it can be performed correctly on the first try. Individual variation is limited. There are unlikely to be aspects of the skill the subject will need to pay attention to correct, and thus, in these types of skills, external focus of attention is often the best. In the event that a researcher does pick a skill for their experiment that is more complicated, and there's potential for the subject to need individual cues and corrections, these are often not given during the experimental protocol. This is because a protocol needs to be standardized. Otherwise, it becomes invalid to compare individuals, because now in each individual is getting different types of internal cues, which makes it impossible to compare across subjects. For the purpose of having a consistent protocol, it becomes impossible to judge performance under the influence of mental states. This is just another case of why, when we study the human mind, we must understand how complicated and unknown it still is to us. So much so that we need to rethink how we apply the scientific method to unreplicatable events. In conclusion, it is your job as a practitioner and teacher to regulate attention. Use of external focus of attention away from the body and towards the goal whenever possible, but do not be afraid to switch to an internal focus of attention towards the body or movement process when it requires some more attention.